She spent 6 years rebuilding her life from the ashes, alone, with no help, no one to ask how she was doing. 6 years raising her child, paying off debts, and learning to forget the man who once meant everything to her. But tonight, in the midst of a New York snowstorm, the restaurant door opened, and he walked in. Not the man she once loved, but something darker, more dangerous, and far more terrifying. The worst part? In her apron pocket was a photograph, her 6-year-old son with eyes that were the spitting image of his. If you enjoy stories of love, secrets, and betrayal, please watch to the end, hit like, and comment with the name of the city you're watching in so I know how far this story has progressed. The snow started around 9. By 10:15, it had turned the intersection of Bleecker and Thompson into a skating rink nobody asked for, and the dinner rush at Carmine's had swollen from uncomfortable to suffocating. Every table packed, every booth full, the bar 3 deep with people who'd ducked in from the storm and decided one drink had turned into 4. Ava Sinclair had been on her feet since 4 in the afternoon. She moved through the dining room the way she always did, fast, quiet, cutting between chairs and elbows, with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this so many times the floor plan lived somewhere behind her eyes. Tray balanced on one hand, notepad in her apron pocket beside her phone, the phone she checked every 20 minutes when she thought nobody was looking. The babysitter had texted at 8:30, "Noah's asleep." Stop worrying. She was still worrying. She set down a plate of linguine in front of a man who didn't look up from his own phone, pivoted toward table 7 where a couple was gesturing at their empty wine glasses, and tried to remember if she'd eaten anything since noon. She hadn't. There was half a granola bar in her locker. She'd get to it during the 11 o'clock lull, assuming there was one. Ava. Marcus, one of the other servers, appeared at her elbow. He was 23 and perpetually sweating. Table 12's been waiting on their appetizers for 40 minutes. They're getting loud. Tell them the kitchen's backed up. I told them that 20 minutes ago. Tell them again. She didn't wait for his response. Table 7 needed wine. Table 3 needed their check. And somewhere in the back, the dishwasher was making a grinding sound. It hadn't made yesterday. She added it to the long internal list of things that were somebody else's problem until they became hers. The restaurant smelled the way it always smelled. Garlic, candle wax, the faint ghost of cigarette smoke from the coats people hung by the door, red leather booths, black and white photographs of old New York on the walls. Carmine's had been here for 30 years, and it looked like it, in the comfortable, lived-in way of places that never bothered updating themselves because they didn't have to. Ava had worked here for 2 years. Before that, a diner in Queens. Before that, 3 months answering phones for a company that went under. Before that, she didn't think about before that. Before that was a different version of herself, younger and stupid in the specific way of people who believed that loving someone hard enough was a form of protection. She was 28 now. The stupidity had been burned out of her, slowly, the way fever breaks. She was pouring wine at table 7 when the room changed. She didn't hear it happen. She felt it. A shift in the pressure of the room, the way the collective noise dropped half a pitch, the way the hostess near the front went very still. Ava's hand kept pouring. She finished, smiled at the couple, tucked the bottle under her arm. Then she turned around. The door was open. Cold air pushed in from outside, sharp enough that she could feel it from 15 feet away. The first man through was wide across the shoulders, dark coat, eyes moving over the room with the practiced neutrality of someone paid to look for problems. A second man followed, then a third. Then Damian Moretti walked in. She knew him in the first half-second, before her brain had time to build an argument against it. The body recognized what the mind hadn't caught up to yet. A tightening behind the sternum, a cold drop low in her stomach. The particular kind of stillness that comes right before something breaks. 6 years. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe he'd just learned to take up more space. The suit was charcoal, fitted the way expensive things are fitted, and he wore it with the ease of a man who'd spent years deciding nothing in his wardrobe would ever be uncomfortable again. His hair was darker than she remembered, cut short at the sides. His face had sharpened. The softness she'd known, the way he used to laugh with his whole face, eyes going crinkled at the corners, was gone. What was left was something else. Something that made the hostess stand 2 inches straighter and the nearby tables go quiet without understanding why. Damien Moretti scanned the room the way his men had, but slower, more deliberate, like he was looking for something specific rather than looking for threats. His eyes found her. Ava didn't breathe. For a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4. There was nothing else in the restaurant, not the noise or the heat or the smell of garlic or the wine bottle growing heavy in her hand. Just him, across the room, looking at her the way you look at something you thought you'd lost and had stopped letting yourself search for. She looked away first. She turned her back on him and walked toward the service station and stood behind the partition and pressed one hand flat against the wall because her legs were doing something she didn't have a name for. The wine bottle was still in her other hand. She set it down before she could drop it. He's here. The thought was useless. He's here, and you have to work. She had 4 tables waiting. She had a granola bar in her locker and $40 in tips so far, and a 6-year-old asleep in an apartment 14 blocks away, and a babysitter she was paying $11 an hour she didn't entirely have. She did not have space in this night for Damien Moretti. She breathed, once, twice. Then she picked up a tray and went back to work. He was seated in the far corner booth. Of course he was. The corner booth had the cleanest sight lines to every entrance. She knew this now, had learned to know things like this without wanting to. And his men had arranged themselves at the adjacent tables with the practiced efficiency of a security detail that did this 3 times a week. The restaurant's manager, a nervous man named Gerald, who Ava had never once seen sweat, was personally handing Damien a menu. She took Table 12's appetizer order. She topped off coffee at Table 9. She checked her phone. Babysitter hadn't texted again, which meant Noah was fine, which was the only thing she was allowed to think about right now. She did not look at the corner booth. At 11, the rush began to thin. The storm outside had discouraged late arrivals, and the tables were turning over slowly now, people finishing their meals and braving the walk back to wherever they'd come from. Ava counted her tips. $47. She needed to cover the babysitter and buy Noah's allergy medication tomorrow, and she was about $30 short of comfortable for the week, which meant she was right on schedule. She was calculating whether she could pick up a Sunday lunch shift when she became aware that someone was standing behind her. She turned. Damien was alone. His men were still at their table, but he'd walked the length of the restaurant without her noticing, and now he was 3 feet away. And up close, the changes in him were sharper. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before, a faint scar at his jawline, thin, almost invisible, but she noticed it the way you notice things about a face you once knew by heart. "Ava," he said. His voice was the same. She'd been half hoping it wouldn't be. "We're closing in 40 minutes, she said. "Is there something you need?" Something crossed his face. Not hurt. She wouldn't have called it hurt. More like recognition, like he'd expected this and had decided to absorb it anyway. "I didn't know you worked here," he said. "Now you do." She turned back to the service station. "I'll let your server know about the check." "That's not—" He stopped. Tried again. "I just want to talk." "It's been 6 years, Damien." She kept her voice flat and even, the voice she used on difficult customers, the one that gave nothing away. "I don't think we have anything to talk about." She walked away before he could answer. Her hands were shaking by the time she got to the back. She stood in the hallway outside the kitchen and pressed them against her thighs and breathed through her nose and told herself this was manageable. This was just a man she used to know. He would finish his dinner and leave, and she would go home and check on Noah, and this would be a strange story she maybe told someone someday. She touched her apron pocket. The photograph was still there. She'd carried it for 2 days, meaning to frame it, forgetting, carrying it again. Noah at the park last weekend, squinting into the sun with that particular expression that had always made her chest ache because it wasn't her expression. It had never been her expression. She pushed the photograph deeper into the pocket and went back out. He was gone from the service area. Back at his table, she could see him from across the room, speaking quietly to one of his men. The manager, Gerald, looked like a man who had been asked to do something he wasn't sure about and had agreed anyway. At 11:40, Damien Moretti and his security detail left. He didn't look at her on the way out. Ava finished her side work. She wiped down tables and restocked sugar and rolled silverware and counted the till with Marcus and said goodnight to the kitchen crew. She put on her coat and her hat and her gloves and pushed out into the cold. The snow had stopped, but the sidewalks were white, and the city was quieter than it ever really got, the storm having pushed most of Manhattan inside. She walked toward the subway with her head down and her breath making small clouds in front of her. She got half a block before she heard footsteps. She turned. Damien was leaning against the building wall, coat collar up, hands in his pockets. Alone. She didn't see his men, which meant they were somewhere she couldn't see them, which was worse. "I'm not following you," he said before she could say it. "I was waiting." "That's the same thing." "It's not." He pushed off the wall. He stopped about 6 feet away, like he was aware that closing the distance was not a right he had. "Ava, 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." "You don't get to ask me for anything." She said it without heat, which was harder than saying it angry would have been. Anger she had. This flat certainty had taken her years to build. "You left. You didn't call. You didn't write. You just—" She stopped, steadied herself. "You were gone." "I know. That's not an explanation." "I know that too." His jaw was tight. The scar caught the light from the street lamp above them, and she wondered, not for the first time in the last 2 hours, how he'd gotten it. "There are things I need to tell you. I don't want to hear them." "Ava, I built a life, Damien." Her voice stayed level, but something underneath it wasn't. "I didn't have a choice, so I built one. And it's not much, okay? It's not what I thought it would look like, but it's mine and it works, and I don't need you showing up, and—" She stopped again. She could feel the cold going through her coat, settling in her shoulders. "Whatever you think you need to tell me, I don't need to hear it." He was quiet for a long moment. "How old is he?" The bottom dropped out of her stomach. She went very still. The street was empty in both directions, snow-white and lamplit, and the only sound was the distant hiss of a taxi somewhere around the corner and the sound of her own pulse in her ears. "I saw the photograph," Damien said quietly. "When you were at the service station, it fell halfway out of your pocket." She couldn't speak. "He looks—" Damien stopped. Something in his face shifted, something she couldn't name and didn't want to. "Ava, how old is he?" "You need to go." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'm not going anywhere until you—" "You need to go!" Louder this time. The shake was in it now. She couldn't keep it out. "You don't get to walk back in here and ask me that. You don't get to just—" "You were gone, Damien. You were just gone, and I was—" She pressed her hand over her mouth, breathed, dropped her hand. "Leave me alone." She turned and walked, fast, faster than was safe on the icy sidewalk, but she didn't slow down. She didn't look back. She made it to the subway entrance and went down the stairs and through the turnstile and stood on the platform with her arms wrapped around herself and her jaw clenched so tight it ached. The train came. She got on. She stood holding the pole and staring at her own reflection in the dark window across from her and tried to figure out how badly tonight had just broken the careful architecture of the life she'd built. The train rocked. A drunk man slept at the far end of the car. A teenage girl scrolled her phone. Ava thought about Noah asleep in his bed. That photograph, the way Damien's voice had sounded when he said he looks, and hadn't been able to finish the sentence. "He looks like me." He hadn't had to say it. She got off at her stop and walked the 2 blocks to her building and paid the babysitter and checked on Noah, asleep, one arm hanging off the side of the mattress, his hair a disaster, his face completely peaceful, and went to her own room and sat on the edge of the bed without taking her coat off. She sat there for a long time. In the morning, she told herself, she would figure out what to do. She would make a plan, the way she always made plans, practical and step by step, because the only way she'd ever gotten through anything was to break it into pieces small enough to manage. She would figure it out. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it through 3 vibrations, then answered. Silence on the other end. Then a voice. Not Damien's, someone else. Male, flat and unhurried. Said, "Ms. Sinclair, you should know that there are people watching your apartment right now. People who are not Mr. Moretti's. I'd suggest you don't go to sleep just yet." The line went dead. Ava sat very still in the dark of her bedroom and listened to the silence of the building around her and thought about Noah down the hall and the locked door between them, and understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water through her veins, that whoever had been erased the night Damien Moretti disappeared from her life had not stayed erased. They had simply been waiting. She sat on the edge of her bed with her coat still on and her phone in her lap, and she listened. That was all she did for the first 10 minutes after the call. Listened to the building, the pipes, the radiator ticking in the corner, the sound of a car moving slowly down the street outside. Slowly. Too slowly for the hour, too deliberate for a night when the snow had pushed most traffic off the roads. She got up and went to the window without turning on the light. The street below was white and quiet. A sedan sat parked at the far corner, engine off, no visible occupant. Could be nothing. Could be a resident who'd found street parking and counted themselves lucky. She stood there long enough that her breath fogged the glass, watching, and the car didn't move and nobody got out and she still didn't feel better. She went to Noah's room. He was exactly as she'd left him, arm hanging off the mattress, mouth slightly open, completely elsewhere. She stood in the doorway and looked at him in the dark and felt something move through her chest that had no clean name. Not quite fear, not quite love. Something that lived in the overlap between the two and sharpened both of them into something almost physical. She pulled his arm back onto the bed. He stirred, made a sound, went still again. She went back to her room and sat and stared at the unknown number in her call log and did not call it back. Instead, she found Damien's name. She hadn't deleted it. 6 years ago, she'd told herself she would, and then she hadn't. And she'd been furious with herself about it for approximately 1 week before deciding the fury was wasted energy, and she pressed call before she could argue herself out of it. He picked up on the second ring. "Someone just called me," she said. No greeting. Unknown number. A man. He said there are people watching my building, people that aren't yours. Silence. A short one, but the quality of it told her something. Not surprise exactly. More like confirmation of something he'd already suspected. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. "No. Ava." His voice had changed. The careful, measured tone from the street outside the restaurant was gone. What replaced it was flatter and harder and more honest. "This isn't a conversation I'm asking to have. Stay away from the windows." The call ended. She sat with the phone in her hand and the dark around her and thought about the word no, and how many times she'd meant it tonight, and how little any of it seemed to matter. He made it in 15. She heard the vehicles before she saw them. 2 SUVs, headlights off despite the hour, pulling up in front of the building with a quiet efficiency that made her stomach drop. She watched from the edge of the window as Damien got out, spoke briefly to 2 men, and came inside. She buzzed him up without deciding to. He knocked twice. She opened the door. Up close, without the restaurant between them, and the cold air thinning the edges of everything, he looked different, more tired. There was tension across his shoulders that the expensive suit couldn't entirely conceal, and his eyes went past her into the apartment immediately, cataloging it, before they came back to her face. "He's asleep," she said, before he could ask. "Good." He stepped inside without being invited. She let him because the alternatives were worse. He walked through the small living room slowly, going to the window, looking out at the street the same way she had, except his face gave away nothing. "The sedan at the corner," she said, "already handled." She didn't ask what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know what handled meant when Damien Moretti said it at midnight in the voice he was currently using. "Who called me?" she asked. He turned from the window. For a moment he just looked at her, and she got the sense he was deciding something. How much? How fast? What order? "His name is probably someone you'll never need to know," he said. "He works for a man named Vincent Falco. That name mean anything to you?" "No." "Good." He moved away from the window. "That means they've been watching you without making contact. Until tonight." "Why tonight?" He sat down on her couch, just sat, like the decision happened below the level of conscious thought. Like he'd done it 100 times and his body remembered even if everything else between them had been erased. And he put his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment. "Because they saw me go into the restaurant," he said. She stood across the room with her arms folded and said nothing. They've been tracking my movements for weeks, Damien continued. I knew that. I thought I had enough distance from... He stopped, started again. I thought coming in was low risk. It was a public place. I didn't know you worked there. You keep saying that, because it's true. And now what? Her voice stayed even. She was proud of that. Now people are watching my apartment, and my son is asleep down the hall, and you're on my couch at midnight. That's where we are. He looked up. Something in his face shifted when she said my son, a tightening around the jaw, but he didn't push on it. I need to move you, he said. No. Ava. No. She uncrossed her arms. I have a job. Noah has school. I have a life here, and you don't get to... These people put a man outside your building tonight. He said it quietly, which was somehow worse than if he'd raised his voice. They called your cell phone, which means they've been thorough enough to find your cell phone. They're not going to stay on the sidewalk. She stood very still. Why? She said. Why would anyone... She stopped. The pieces were there. She just didn't want to put them together. They saw you come in. They know we know each other. Yes. So they think they can use me to get to you. Yes. She sat down on the chair across from him because her legs weren't as reliable as she'd been counting on. She pressed her palms flat on her thighs and looked at the floor and thought about Noah's face, asleep, and the photograph, and the way Damien's sentence had broken apart on the sidewalk when he'd tried to say what her son looked like. Tell me what happened, she said. 6 years ago. Tell me what actually happened. He was quiet long enough that she looked up. His jaw was tight. Something behind his eyes looked like a man pressing down on a wound. There was a move against me, he said. Inside the organization. Someone I'd trusted for a long time decided I was more useful dead than in place. They set it up carefully. I walked into a situation I thought was routine, and it wasn't. His hand moved to his jaw, touched the scar briefly, dropped again. I survived, not cleanly. I spent 6 weeks in a facility in Montreal while my body decided which way it was going to go. 6 weeks, she said. By the time I could move, could make calls, everything connected to you was gone. Your number, your address, the bar you used to work at. You'd moved, and I didn't have the resources right then to... He stopped. I had enemies trying to finish the job. I had a war to survive. I told myself I would find you when it was safe. When it was safe, she repeated. I know how that sounds. Do you? She leaned forward. I was pregnant, Damien. I was 22 and I was 3 months pregnant and you disappeared and I had no idea if you were alive or dead or if you just... The steadiness cracked. She pulled it back, hard. I called your number every day for 2 weeks. Then it was disconnected. I went to the address I had for you and the apartment was empty. I didn't know what to do with not knowing. He absorbed this without flinching, which she respected and resented in equal measure. I know, he said. Stop saying that. What do you want me to say? I want you to explain to me how a man who claimed to love me couldn't find me in 6 years. She watched his face. You run an organization. You have resources. I'm a waitress in Manhattan. I'm not hiding. Something went across his expression. Not shame, exactly, but close to it, pressed down and shaped into something more controlled. For the first 2 years, finding you would have put you in danger, he said. Every move I made was being watched. After that, he paused. She could see him choosing words the way a man picks his way across uncertain ground. After that, I told myself you were better off. The silence in the apartment was complete except for the radiator. You decided that, she said. Yes. Without asking me. Yes. She stood up, walked to the kitchen because she needed something to do with herself, needed the distance of the counter between them. She filled a glass of water she didn't drink and set it down and looked at the window over the sink and the darkness beyond it. Noah, she said. Her voice had gone quiet. His name is Noah. He's 6. He starts first grade in the fall. He's allergic to tree nuts and he's scared of escalators and his favorite thing in the world right now is dinosaurs. She stopped. Her throat was doing something she didn't want it to do. He has never once asked me where his father is because I told him his father was gone, and he accepted that the way kids accept things, because they trust what you tell them. She heard Damien stand up behind her. Ava. Don't. She pressed her fingertips against the counter. I'm not trying to hurt you. I just need you to understand what I'm telling you. He doesn't know you exist. And I built it that way on purpose because I thought that was the safe thing to do. I thought the absence was better than the explanation. And now you're standing in my kitchen at midnight and there are people outside and I don't... She exhaled. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with any of this. He didn't say anything. She turned around. He was standing in the middle of her living room looking at the hallway that led to Noah's room, and his face had done something she hadn't seen in any version of Damien Moretti. The one she'd loved at 22 or the one who'd walked into the restaurant tonight. His face had gone completely open. No control, no calculation, no careful placement of expression. Just a man standing in a hallway looking toward a child he hadn't known existed 4 hours ago. She looked away because the sight of it was more than she could manage right now. You need to be careful, she said. He's not... You can't just... I know. This time the words came out different. Not deflection. Something heavier. I know, Ava. They stood in the kitchen, not looking at each other for a long moment. How long do we have to leave for? She asked finally. It wasn't agreement. It was just the next question. I don't know yet. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have right now. He moved back to the window, checked the street again. I have a place. Outside the city. It's secure. I need you to pack what you need for a week, and I need you to get Noah up as gently as you can. It's 1 a.m. I know. He's 6. I know that too. He turned from the window. His expression was back to controlled, buttoned up, the version built for situations exactly like this one. I wouldn't ask if I thought we had until morning. She looked at him for a long moment, this man she'd once known the geography of completely. The scar on his ribs from a bike accident at 12, the way he ground his teeth when he was anxious, the fact that he couldn't sleep without something covering his feet, and tried to reconcile the person she remembered with the one standing in her apartment with bodyguards outside. She couldn't. Maybe that was the point. 1 week, she said, and then we sit down and you tell me everything, not pieces, everything. Okay? And I make the decisions about Noah, not you, me. His jaw worked. She could see him with the impulse to argue it, and she watched him set the impulse aside. Okay, he said. She went down the hall. She stood in Noah's doorway for a moment, watching him sleep, and she said something to herself that she wouldn't say out loud because it would make it too real. Something about keeping him safe, about it being the only thing that mattered, about getting through whatever came next the same way she'd gotten through everything else. One piece at a time, no looking too far ahead. Then she went in and started packing his dinosaur backpack and tried to figure out how to wake a 6-year-old gently enough that he wouldn't be frightened. She was pulling a sweatshirt from his drawer when she heard voices from the living room, low, urgent. She came back to the doorway. Damien was on his phone, half turned away from her, and his shoulders had changed, squared, higher, the tension visible from across the room. When? He said. A pause. How many? Another pause, longer. His hand pressed flat against the wall beside the window. Don't move on them yet. Hold your position and wait for my... He turned and saw her in the doorway. The look on his face told her everything before he said a word. What happened? She said. He lowered the phone. They moved faster than I thought, he said. There were 2 men in the building. They came in through the service entrance about 15 minutes ago. He paused. My guys have them. But there were 2 more we didn't account for, and we can't locate them yet. The apartment felt smaller. The hallway felt longer. They're in the building? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Contained. The 2 we have. His eyes moved past her toward Noah's room. But I need you to get him now. We need to leave now. She turned back into Noah's room, and she wasn't gentle about waking him anymore. She was efficient. She was pulling him upright and saying his name low and firm, and he came awake confused and warm and trusting in the way that broke something in her chest every single time. Mama? He blinked. He looked at the backpack in her hands. Are we going somewhere? Yeah, baby. She got the sweatshirt over his head. We're going on a trip, right now. It's dark. I know. Is it a fun trip? She looked at his face. Sleep crumpled, curious, not afraid yet because she wasn't afraid yet, because she was holding it in the part of herself that had learned to hold things that couldn't be put down. And she said, yeah, it's an adventure. Noah considered this with the serious deliberation of a 6-year-old. Then he nodded. She picked him up, which she could barely do anymore, he was getting too big. But she did it anyway, and he tucked his head against her shoulder, and she carried him toward the living room where Damien was waiting. Noah lifted his head. He looked at Damien. Damien looked at Noah. The silence lasted maybe 4 seconds, long enough that Ava felt her pulse in her throat. Then Noah, with the total absence of self-consciousness available only to young children, said, "Who are you?" Damien's face did the thing again. The open, unguarded thing that she hadn't been prepared for the first time and wasn't prepared for now. He crouched down to Noah's level, which brought him closer to Ava than she wanted, and he said quietly, "I'm a friend of your mom's." Noah studied him with large, serious eyes that were, and this was the thing Ava lived with every day, the thing that had no resolution, that were the exact shape and color of the man crouching in front of him. "You have a scar," Noah said. "Yeah," Damien said. "I do." "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." Noah appeared to find this satisfactory. He put his head back on Ava's shoulder. She adjusted his weight and looked at Damien over the top of their son's head, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing to say, nothing that would fit inside this moment without breaking it. Damien's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his expression closed. "We need to go," he said. "Right now." She followed him toward the door, and she didn't look back at the apartment. The 2 years of slow work it represented, the photographs on the wall, the progress charts from Noah's school pinned to the fridge, the small, careful evidence of a life rebuilt piece by piece, because if she looked back, she wasn't sure she could keep moving forward. They were in the stairwell, Damien's hand on the door at the bottom, when they heard it. A single sound from the floor above them. Heavy, deliberate. Footsteps. Damien went completely still. His hand moved. She registered the motion peripherally, didn't want to look at what his hand had moved toward. He glanced back at her, and in the low light of the stairwell, his eyes were very clear and very calm in the way of someone who had been in enough situations like this one to know exactly how dangerous they were. He held up one finger. "Wait." Noah's arms tightened around her neck, and Ava pressed her hand against the back of his head and held him close and listened to the footsteps above and understood, with a cold and absolute clarity, that the life she had built was already gone, had been gone from the moment those restaurant doors opened and Damien Moretti walked back into the world she'd constructed so carefully without— Damien didn't move. His hand stayed where it was, pressed flat against the stairwell door, and he stood with the particular stillness of someone who had learned that stillness was itself a form of information, that what you didn't do told you as much as what you did. Ava counted her own heartbeats. She got to 7 before he shifted his weight slightly, tilting his head, and she understood he was listening for something she couldn't hear. Noah hadn't made a sound. He had his face pressed against her neck and both fists in the fabric of her coat, and he was breathing in short, controlled pulls, like some instinct older than language had told him this was not a moment for questions. Then Damien's phone vibrated. He looked at it without raising it, just dropped his chin, read the screen. His shoulders dropped a fraction. "Mine," he said quietly. "The third man. They have him." She breathed. Noah's fist slowly unclenched from her coat. Damien pushed the door open and they moved. Into the lobby, across the tile, out the front door into the dead cold of 2 a.m. The SUVs were still there. 3 men she didn't know were on the sidewalk, arranged with a casualness that was entirely cosmetic. One of them had a jaw that had been broken at least once and healed at a slight angle. He nodded at Damien without looking at Ava. "Package secured," he said. Damien said, "All 3?" "All 3. Building's clean." Ava got into the vehicle without being asked because the cold was enormous and Noah was heavy and she was done making decisions about what she would and wouldn't do tonight. She sat in the back seat with Noah across her lap and his head against her arm, and she watched the building she'd lived in for 2 years get smaller through the rear window. She didn't look at Damien, who was in the front seat. He didn't try to talk to her. Noah fell asleep before they crossed the bridge. The house was 40 minutes north of the city, up into Westchester, where the roads went dark and the trees pressed close on both sides, and the properties hid themselves behind stone walls and iron gates. The gate opened before the car reached it, which meant someone had been notified they were coming, which meant there were layers of organization here that she was only seeing the surface of. The house itself was large and old and lit only at the ground floor, warm light behind heavy curtains. A man opened the front door before they reached the steps. Inside was clean and quiet. Wood floors, high ceilings, furniture that was expensive in the functional way rather than the decorative one. A kitchen with a long table, a fire going in a stone fireplace in the main room, which meant someone had been here ahead of them, which meant Damien had called ahead at some point, and she hadn't heard it happen. She was aware of every single thing she hadn't been told. A woman appeared from the back of the house, 50s, compact, her gray hair cut short and practical. She looked at Noah with something close to tenderness and at Ava with straightforward professional assessment. "Mrs. Carver," Damien said, "she'll need a room, and the boy." "Room's ready," Mrs. Carver said. She looked at Ava. "Bathroom's stocked. There are clothes in the closet, various sizes. Help yourself." She held out her arms for Noah. "I can take him." Ava's grip tightened involuntarily. Mrs. Carver's expression didn't change. "I raised 4 of my own," she said. "He'll be in the room next to yours. Door stays open." Ava looked at Damien. He met her eyes and said nothing. She transferred Noah, still asleep, boneless with it, his mouth slightly open, into Mrs. Carver's arms and watched them go up the stairs and stood in the front hallway of a house she'd never been in with a man she barely recognized and tried to locate the floor beneath her feet. "You need to eat something," Damien said. "I need you to explain what's happening." Both things can be true. She followed him to the kitchen because she was cold and her legs ached from 8 hours on the restaurant floor before any of tonight had happened. He poured water, set it in front of her, poured his own. He sat across the table and looked like a man who had not slept since sometime yesterday. "Vincent Falco," she said. "Yes." "Start there." He was quiet for a moment, not stalling. Organizing, she thought, sorting through what to say in what order. She'd seen him do this before, this particular pause in a different life when the things he was organizing were much smaller. "Vincent was my father's second," he said. "When my father got sick, before he died, Vincent was the logical succession. He expected it. Everybody expected it." Damien turned the water glass slowly in his hands. "My father chose me instead, left it to me. Vincent accepted it, said he accepted it." His jaw moved. "He's been working to undo that decision for 3 years. The assassination attempt. That was him. Yes, I didn't know for a long time. I suspected after the fact, pieced it together slowly, but I couldn't prove it until 8 months ago." His eyes came up. "When I proved it, I started making moves to remove him. He found out I was moving, so he started watching me more carefully. And he found me." "He found you the same way I would have found you if I'd looked," Damien said. "Because you're not hiding. You're just living." The word looked landed, and she let it land and didn't pursue it because there were more important things. "What does he want with us?" she said. "With me and Noah specifically." Damien set the glass down. "Leverage," he said. "He can't move against me directly anymore. I've closed too many of those doors. But if he has something I want protected..." He stopped. "He's watched the restaurant. He knows I went back 3 times. He doesn't know about Noah yet, I think, but the photograph? If the man who called you saw the photograph, he could find out. He already has resources in positions I haven't fully identified yet." His voice was controlled, but something underneath it wasn't. "That's the problem I've been working on for 8 months and haven't solved." She sat with this for a moment. "So your plan was what?" she said. "Move us here, keep us safe, and then what?" "Find out who Vincent has inside my organization. Remove the problem. Remove Vincent." "That's not a timeline. That's a concept." His mouth pressed together. "I know." "How long?" she said.
Realistically, how long does Noah not go to school and I don't go to work and we sit in this house while you figure it out? I don't know. Damien. I don't know, Ava. For the first time tonight, his voice had an edge to it. I'm working with incomplete information, and I have been for months, and I am telling you honestly that I don't have a timeline because the timeline depends on variables I can't fully... Is he safe here? The edge went out of his voice. Yes, he said. This is the safest place I have.
She looked at him across the table and thought about what it meant to trust that answer from this man, with his track record, with the scar on his jaw, and the three men her building's stairwell had apparently contained tonight without her even knowing it was happening. She thought about what it meant to have no better option. She finished the water and went upstairs. Noah was in a narrow bed with a quilt pulled up to his chin. Mrs. Carver was gone. The room next door was clean and spare, and the bed was made, and she lay down on top of the covers with her shoes off and her coat still on, and she was asleep before she could decide anything else. She slept 4 hours, maybe 5. She woke to Noah's voice down the hall, asking Mrs. Carver a question about whether there were squirrels outside, and Mrs. Carver's patient, measured response, and the sound of the two of them going downstairs together in a way that was so unbearably ordinary that Ava lay still and stared at the ceiling for a full minute before she could move. She showered, found clothes in the closet, jeans, a gray sweater, both close enough to her size that she didn't think about who had bought them or when. She went downstairs. Noah was at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a hand-drawn map of where he thought the squirrels lived. He looked up when she came in and said, "Mama, there's a whole forest," with the same tone he used to report things of significant importance. And she sat beside him and looked at his map and said, "Show me," because that was what you did. That was how you got through things. Damien was not in the kitchen. She found him an hour later through a door off the main hallway that opened into what had been a sitting room and was now something else entirely. A long table covered in papers and photographs and printed documents, 2 laptops open, a rolling whiteboard along one wall covered in names and lines and circles she didn't have the context to read. 2 men were in the room. They stopped talking when she appeared. Damien turned. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "I need to understand something," she said. She looked at the whiteboard, the names, the connections, the web of whatever this was. "You said you've been working on this for 8 months, identifying who Vincent has inside." "Yes." "Have you identified them?" A pause. "Some," he said. "Some." "It's not a small organization," he said. "Finding a leak isn't like, how many people know where this house is?" The 2 men exchanged a look she caught and didn't like. "Damien," her voice was very steady, "how many people know we're here?" "The people in this room," he said, "my head of security, and 3 others I trust completely." "You trust completely," she said, "the way you trusted Vincent." The room went quiet. She watched his jaw tighten. I'm not attacking you. I'm asking you to be honest with me about the limits of what you know." She kept her eyes on his face. "Because you had a leak you couldn't find for 8 months. And last night, they had 3 men in my building within an hour of you walking into that restaurant. That's not surveillance. That's a response system. Someone told them immediately." One of the men in the room shifted his weight. Damien said, "I know." "So who knew you were going to the restaurant last night?" He was still for a moment. Then he said to the men in the room, "Give us a minute." They left. He turned back to her and something in his face had shifted. The layer that stayed controlled under pressure, the professional surface that she'd been reading all night, had thinned. What was underneath was more complicated and less comfortable. 4 people knew my schedule last night, he said. My driver, my head of security, Marco, 2 others. He paused. I've worked with Marco for 9 years. I know. He was in Montreal when I was recovering. I know. He's the one who helped me rebuild after the attempt. He's the one who identified the... He stopped. She watched him stop, watched him arrive somewhere he hadn't let himself go before. He's the one who told you they'd erased my location, she said quietly. When you were recovering. He was the one who reported back that he couldn't find where I'd gone.
The silence in the room was absolute. Damien's face had gone very still in a way that was different from his professional stillness. This was the stillness of a man standing on ground he'd trusted his entire weight to for 9 years and feeling it move. "He could have found you," Damien said. His voice had gone low and flat. "If he was working for Vincent, he would have been able to—" "He didn't want you to find me," she said. "He wanted you isolated." The words sat between them. She watched it land. She watched Damien Moretti, who had built everything he was on the foundation of knowing who he could trust and who he couldn't, absorb the possibility that the man closest to him for nearly a decade had been feeding information to the man trying to destroy him. His phone rang. He looked at it. His expression changed, sharpened, snapped back to surface. He answered it. "What?" A pause. His eyes went to the window. "When?" His jaw set. "How many did he—" He stopped listening. She could tell from his body that he'd stopped listening because whatever had been said had superseded the need to hear more of it. He lowered the phone. "Marco's gone," he said. "He left the compound 40 minutes ago. His car was found at the train station in White Plains. His phone is off." She absorbed this. "He ran," she said. "He ran!" Damien's voice was completely flat, which means he knew I was getting close, which means— His phone rang again. He answered it immediately this time. And this time he didn't say anything. He just listened, and she watched the color leave his face, not gradually, not the slow blanch of growing dread, but all at once, like a light being switched off behind his eyes. He lowered the phone. She already knew it was bad. She already knew before he said anything because she had been reading this man's face for 6 years, even in absence, had learned it at 22 and carried it like a language she couldn't unlearn. "They have Noah," he said. The floor was there and then it wasn't. She heard the words. She processed them with the mechanical part of her brain that stayed functional past the point where everything else had stopped. The part that had kept her moving through every difficult thing she'd ever faced, and she heard herself say very quietly, "What?" Mrs. Carver took him to the backyard, to see the squirrels. His voice was— she had no word for what his voice was. She came back inside to get his coat. When she went back out, she was already moving. She was already through the door and in the hallway and at the back door that opened to the yard, which was empty, which was a wide, white expanse of snow and frozen grass backed by the tree line. And there were footprints in the snow. Small ones and larger ones, and then just larger ones, leading toward the trees, and then nothing. She stood in the open door and the cold came through her sweater and she looked at the footprints. And she thought about Noah's voice at the table asking about squirrels, and Mrs. Carver's patient response, and the sound of them going downstairs together. And something inside her broke open, and then immediately sealed itself back up, because breaking was not an option. Breaking was not something she was still standing in the open doorway when Damien's hand closed around her arm. Not rough, not pulling her back. Just there. Pressure through the sweater sleeve, solid and specific, the way you hold someone who is standing at the edge of something. "Ava?" His voice was close to her ear. She couldn't look away from the footprints. Small ones. Noah's boots, the ones with the Velcro straps because he still couldn't tie laces reliably, leaving those particular shallow treads in the snow. Leading toward the trees and then swallowed by them and then gone. "Ava, look at me." She turned. She didn't decide to, her body just did it, swinging toward him the way a compass needle swings. His face was controlled, barely. The bones of it were doing the work, holding everything in place through what looked like considerable effort. "He's alive," Damien said. "They took him alive, that's the leverage. They will not hurt him while he's leverage." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. I know how Vincent thinks." Something moved behind his eyes. "He's going to make contact. He's going to tell us where and when and what he wants. That's how this works." "He took my son." The words came out quiet and completely level, and she could feel the thing underneath them, the enormous obliterating thing, and she pressed it down with every muscle in her body because she could not afford it right now. "He has my son, and you're telling me how this works." "I'm telling you he's alive. Right now. This moment.
He's alive and scared and probably asking whoever's got him 100 questions about squirrels or dinosaurs or whatever is in his head right now because that's who he is. And we have time to get him back if we don't. He stopped. If we don't come apart. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" Something in his face shifted, not relief. Something more complicated than relief. "Right now? Stay in this house. Stay with my people. Don't—" His phone went off. Unknown number. He answered it before the second vibration. "Moretti." He listened. His hand tightened on his phone. "Let me hear him." A pause. 3 seconds of absolute silence in the kitchen, Ava standing close enough to the phone that she could hear the faint ambient sound of wherever the call was coming from. Echoing, industrial, the distant groan of metal. And then a small voice, her son's voice, slightly higher than normal but trying very hard to be brave, said, "Mama?" She pressed her fist against her mouth. "Hey, buddy," Damien said. His voice had gone completely even, stripped of everything except a deliberate, manufactured calm. "You okay?" "There's a man here who smells bad," Noah said. A rough sound from somewhere on the line. Not quite a laugh, not quite not. Then another voice. Adult, male, smooth, in the particular way of men who had practiced smooth for so long, it had become reflexive. "He's fine. For now he's fine." "Falco," Damien said. "You found my man, I hear. Marco. Little faster than I expected." Vincent Falco's voice was unhurried, almost conversational, the voice of a man conducting an unpleasant but necessary errand. "I had to accelerate my timeline." "Where?" "The Meridian Terminal. Red Hook. You know it." "When?" 2 hours. A pause. "Come alone, Damien. Come with an army and the boy becomes a different kind of asset." Another pause, this one longer, waited. "And bring the woman." The call ended. Damien stood with the phone in his hand for 3 seconds, not moving. Then he crossed to the table in the war room and started issuing instructions in a voice that had gone completely flat and operational, stripped of everything personal, and the 2 men who'd come back in were moving before he'd finished sentences. She stood in the doorway and watched him work and thought about Noah saying, "There's a man here who smells bad," with the specific resigned judgment of a first grader. And she took that image and she locked it somewhere behind her sternum and she used it like fuel. "I'm coming," she said. Damien didn't look up. "No." He said, "Bring the woman." He said that to provoke a reaction. "You're not—" "Damien!" She walked into the room. "He has my son. You don't get to tell me to stay here." He looked up then. His eyes went over her face like he was reading something written there in a language he wasn't sure about. "You do what I say when I say it," he said. "No exceptions, no hesitation." "Agreed." He held her gaze for another second. "Get a coat," he said. Red Hook in February was a particular kind of desolate. The waterfront industrial, all rusted chain link and cracked concrete. The warehouses dark and massive and indifferent. The East River moved beyond the terminals, black and choppy, throwing light back from the Brooklyn Bridge in the distance. The Meridian Terminal had been defunct for 11 years. She knew this because Damien told her on the drive down. This and other things in a low, rapid voice while his driver navigated the FDR and the streets narrowed around them. The layout of the building, the likely entry points, the 4 men he had who were already moving into position in the surrounding blocks. "Not inside," he said. "He'll have eyes for inside. Outside only." He handed her something. She looked at it. "I don't know how to use that," she said. "Safety's here." He showed her. "You point it and you pull the trigger. Don't use it unless someone's between you and Noah and you have no other option." He paused. "And don't shoot me by mistake." She took it. The weight of it was cold and factual in her hand. They went in through a side entrance, a rusted door that Damien's guy had already opened, its lock lying in pieces on the concrete. Inside was dark and enormous and smelled of salt water and old metal and something chemical underneath, the ghost of whatever had been processed here a decade ago. The ceiling was 4 stories up, lost in shadow. Steel catwalks ran along the walls at the 2nd and 3rd levels,
accessed by industrial staircases at each corner. Below, the floor was open concrete, old machinery, crates, the debris of 11 years of emptiness. Portable lights had been set up in the center of the floor. 3 of them, casting a harsh directional glow that lit the middle of the space and made the edges darker by contrast. There were 6 men she could count, probably more she couldn't, and in the center of the lighted space, seated on a metal folding chair with his hands zip-tied in his lap, his dinosaur backpack still on his back. Noah. Ava made a sound she didn't mean to make. He saw her the same moment she saw him, and his face did what faces do when something held very tightly is suddenly allowed to come apart, crumpling just for a second before he pulled it back together with a 6-year-old's ferocious dignity. "Mama," he said. Not a cry, just her name, like confirmation. "I see you, baby." Her voice was steady. She didn't know how. "I see you. You're okay." Vincent Falco stepped out of the shadows. He was not what she'd built in her head. She'd assembled him from context, from Damien's controlled descriptions and the weight that attached to his name, and she'd expected something harder-edged. What she got was a man in his mid-50s who looked like he might teach at a university. Slight, gray at the temples, a dark coat that fit him well. His face was intelligent and tired and completely without warmth. "You came," he said to Damien. He looked at Ava. "Both of you." "Let him go," Damien said. "In a while." Vincent moved toward Noah, not quickly, not threateningly, just moving, and Ava's hand closed around the thing in her coat pocket. Vincent crouched to Noah's level, the same thing Damien had done in her apartment, she thought wildly, and looked at him with something that might have been curiosity. "He looks like you," he said to Damien. "I wasn't sure from the photograph." "He has nothing to do with this," Damien said. "He has everything to do with this." Vincent stood. "He's the reason you came alone instead of burning this building down from outside, which is what you would have done otherwise." He tilted his head. "He's the reason you'll listen to what I'm going to say instead of simply refusing." "Say it then." "Step down." Vincent said it simply, the way you say things you've been waiting to say for a long time. "Sign the organization to me, fully and formally. Whatever paperwork makes it legible, whatever conversations need to happen. You do it cleanly, you leave New York, and this woman and this child never hear my name again." The terminal was silent except for the water sound and the creak of something metal in the levels above them. "That's what you want," Damien said. "That's what I've always wanted." Something crossed Vincent's face. "Your father made a mistake. I've spent 3 years correcting it. I'm offering you the chance to make the correction clean." "And if I say no?" Vincent looked at Noah. He didn't say anything. He just looked at him. Damien's entire body went rigid beside her. She felt it more than saw it, a change in the air pressure, a sudden absolute density to the man standing next to her. "You have 6 hours," Vincent said. "I'll keep the boy comfortable. You go back, you make the calls, you have the papers drawn. You come back here with documentation and I release him to his mother, and we're finished." "You'll release him," Damien said. "You have my word." Something crossed Damien's face. Fast. Too fast for Vincent to read it across the lit space, but she was close enough to catch it. Something cold and resolved that hadn't been there a moment before. "I need to speak to my son," Damien said. Vincent considered this. Then he extended one hand toward Noah. "Go ahead." Damien walked forward. She walked with him because no force in this building was stopping her, and Vincent didn't try. They crossed the lit floor and crouched in front of Noah's chair, and she got her hands on his face immediately, turning it, checking. He was pale, and his eyes were bright with held-back tears, and there was a scrape on his chin that made her jaw tighten. But he was whole. He was present. He was looking between her and Damien with the complicated expression of a child trying to process too much at once. "Hi," Damien said. Noah looked at him. "You came." "Yeah." Damien's voice had gone rough. "We came." "I knew you would." Noah said it with the simple declarative certainty of a child who had decided something and wasn't interested in revising it. Something moved across Damien's face that Ava couldn't look at directly. "I need you to do something for me," Damien said quietly.
When I tell you, I need you to get down low and stay there, on the ground, hands over your head, no matter what you hear. Can you do that? Noah looked at him seriously. Like a fire drill? Exactly like a fire drill. Noah nodded. He was still scared. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he kept his jaw tight. But he nodded. Damien stood. He turned back toward Vincent. No deal, he said. The terminal went very still. Vincent's expression didn't change, exactly. More like it sharpened, the way a lens sharpens when it finds focus. You should think about... I've thought about it. Damien's voice had gone completely flat. You want my word on paper, you want documentation, you want something legible. That means you need me cooperative. If you were going to hurt him, you'd have done it already. His eyes moved around the space, the catwalks, the shadows, the positions of Vincent's visible men. And you're down an asset. Marco's gone. Whoever else you had in my house, I have them. You're operating with what's in this building. A beat of silence. Kill him, Vincent said. Everything happened in the space of a single breath. The nearest man raised his weapon and Damien was already moving. Not away from the man, but toward him, inside the arm's reach where a gun becomes a problem for the person holding it, and the sound of the struggle was brutal and close and physical, flesh and metal, and the crack of something that might have been a wrist. The lights went out. Not the portable ones, those stayed. The ambient lighting in the upper levels died simultaneously, and three things happened in the sudden reconfiguration of shadow. Noah hit the ground exactly the way Damien had told him to, face down, hands over his head, without hesitation. A gunshot went wide and hit a support pillar 20 feet to Ava's left, throwing sparks. And from somewhere in the upper dark of the catwalk level, Damien's 4 outside men, who had not been outside, came down like a controlled demolition. Ava moved. She didn't think about it. Her legs moved and she was across the lit floor and she had Noah by the arm and she was pulling him up and behind her, backing toward the wall the way Damien had positioned them on the walk-in. If it goes wrong, the south wall, the door behind the first support column. She could hear it behind her, the sounds of it. Impacts, voices, the crack of something structural above. She didn't look. She found the column. She found the door behind it. She pushed Noah through. They came out into a narrow service corridor, concrete walls, a single emergency light casting everything green and gray. She pressed him against the wall and crouched in front of him and put her hands on his shoulders. You okay? She said. His chin was shaking, his eyes were wet, but he was upright and he was looking at her and he said, Yeah, in a voice that was more air than sound. Good. She kept her hands on him. We're going to stay here until... The door at the far end of the corridor burst open. 2 men, neither of them Damien's vet. She could see that immediately, something about the way they came through the door, urgent and disorganized, the movement of men executing a backup plan that had gone sideways. She put herself in front of Noah. The first man saw her, registered her, dismissed her, took a step forward. She took the thing from her coat pocket. He stopped. She was aware of her hands, not shaking, clenched, fingers white around the grip, arms extended the way Damien had shown her in 3 seconds in the kitchen of a house 40 minutes north of here. She was aware of her heartbeat, enormous and everywhere. She was aware of Noah's breathing behind her, one small sound of air after another. Don't, she said. The man looked at her with the specific, calculating look of someone running probability. The door behind him opened. Damien came through it. He was bleeding from somewhere on his face and his coat was torn at the shoulder, and he moved like a man carrying damage but not slowing for it. And the 2 men turned, and what happened next was fast and efficient, and she looked away and kept her eyes on the wall beside her while it happened. Quiet. Then, Ava. She turned. Damien was on one knee in front of Noah. Noah was looking at him with the total focused attention he brought to things that mattered to him. Dinosaurs, his hand-drawn maps, things that needed to be understood. You got down, Damien said. You told me to, Noah said. Yeah. His voice had gone rough again, the way it had on the floor of the terminal. I did. He stood. His eyes came to Ava and went over her face, and she watched him find what he was looking for. She didn't know what it was, but he found it, and something across his shoulders released a fraction. Vincent, she said.
Not finished. His jaw was set. He got to the upper level. My men have him contained, but a sound traveled down the corridor. Structural. Deep. The groan of something load-bearing making a decision. Damien looked up at the ceiling. "The catwalk," he said. He looked at Ava. She understood what he was asking without him asking it. "Go," she said. "Take Noah to the south exit, through the corridor. There's a gray door at the end." "Go," she said again. He went. She took Noah's hand and she moved down the corridor, and she didn't count the sounds coming from above. The impact of running feet on metal grating, the raised voice of a man who had been running this particular operation for 3 years and had run out of room, and beneath it, steadier, the sound of Damien Moretti finally standing in the same room as the man who had taken 6 years of his life and 1 night of his son's and was not. It was exactly where Damien had said it would be, which meant he'd walked this building before tonight, had planned for this or something like this, had carried the layout in his head the way she carried Noah's allergy list and the babysitter's number and every other piece of information that constituted the difference between safe and not safe. She pushed through it, and the cold hit her like a wall. River air. February, the East River 30 yards away and black and enormous. She pulled Noah close and moved along the building's exterior toward the street. Above her, through the corrugated metal of the terminal's upper structure, she could hear it. Not clearly. Muffled, industrial, the building absorbing most of the sound, but enough. Impact. Movement. A single sharp crack that echoed out over the water and then stopped. Then nothing. She stopped walking. Noah looked up at her. She stood in the cold with her hand on the back of his head, and she listened to the nothing, and she counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, and she was at 11 when the door behind her opened. Damien came through it. He was walking, which was the first thing she checked. Moving under his own control, which was the second. The bleeding from his face had slowed, a cut above his eyebrow, not deep, the kind that produced a disproportionate amount of blood and looked worse than it was. His coat was destroyed at the shoulder, the lining hanging loose. He was breathing hard, the breath visible in the cold air, coming in controlled pulls like a man managing pain he wasn't going to name. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at Noah first. Looked at him the way she'd seen people look at things they'd been afraid of losing, that particular quality of attention that has relief in it, but also something older and more animal. Then he looked at her. "Vincent?" she said. "Done," he said. She didn't ask what that meant. She understood what it meant. She looked at his hands, knuckles split, the right one worse than the left, and she understood what done meant when said in that voice, with those hands standing outside a defunct shipping terminal at 3 in the morning. "It's over?" she said. Yes. She absorbed this. She looked at the river. It moved the way rivers moved regardless of what happened on their banks. Indifferent, continuous, carrying the light from the bridge in long broken lines across the surface. "Okay," she said. That was all, just that. She took Noah's hand and she walked toward the cars waiting at the end of the block, and she didn't look back at the building. They drove north in silence. Noah fell asleep before they crossed back into Manhattan, slumped against her arm, his dinosaur backpack wedged between them, the Velcro on one strap coming loose at the corner. She held his weight against her and looked out the window at the city moving past. The bridges, the towers, the grid of lit windows that meant people awake at this hour, doing whatever they did in the private hours, unaware, ordinary, safe in their ordinary safety. She was aware of Damien in the front seat. She could see the line of his jaw and profile, the careful way he held his right hand, resting rather than gripping, managing the pain in the knuckles. He didn't try to talk to her. She was aware of this, and she filed it away as information about who he was now. At the house in Westchester, Mrs. Carver was awake and in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea and the specific composed expression of a woman who had learned to wait through bad nights without letting the waiting eat her. When they came through the door, she looked at Noah, asleep in Damien's arms, transferred without waking, small and unconscious and intact. And something moved briefly across her face before she put it away. "I'll take him up," she said. Damien passed him over. His hands stayed slightly raised after Noah's weight left them,
just for a moment before he lowered them. Ava and Damien stood in the kitchen. She got water. She sat at the table. He sat across from her and neither of them spoke for a long time, and the silence was not the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of having too much and not enough air for all of it. She looked at his hands on the table. Split knuckles, the blood dried dark. "You need to clean those," she said. "Yeah." She got up. She found the first aid kit in the cabinet where Mrs. Carver had shown her. She'd checked the house over the previous day the way she checked every space, locating the exits and the useful things, and she brought it to the table and she sat beside him instead of across, and she opened it. He watched her but didn't say anything. She took his right hand. It was larger than she remembered, or she'd forgotten the specifics, and it sat in hers with a kind of passive weight, letting her work. She cleaned the knuckles with antiseptic, and he didn't flinch, and she pressed a little harder than she needed to on the worst one, and he still didn't flinch, and she wasn't sure if that was about pain tolerance or about letting her be angry in the only way she currently had access to. She put the gauze down. "Tell me the rest," she said. "The parts you were deciding how to say." He was quiet for a moment. "Marco," he said. "What about him?" He'd been with Vincent for 2 years, before the assassination attempt, not after. He looked at his wrapped hand. "He didn't just hide your location. He provided it. When Vincent was building the case against me, he needed to know if I had anything that would make me harder to remove. A family." He paused. Marco told him there was a woman. He didn't know about the pregnancy. Neither did Vincent, not until the photograph. She absorbed this. "So for 6 years," she said, "the person who was supposed to be finding me was the reason you couldn't." "Yes." She pressed the medical tape flat with her thumb, smoothed it, did it again. "And you didn't know," she said. "I suspected something was wrong with the search. I didn't—" He stopped. "I trusted him. He'd been with me long enough that I stopped." Another stop. "I stopped checking." "What happened to him?" "Marco." "He's gone." She looked at him. "Gone," he said again, and the word was the same word he'd used for Vincent, the same weight and the same finality, and she set it aside in the same place. She put the first aid kit back together piece by piece, pressing each item into its foam cutout, closing the latches. "I want to be angry at you," she said. "You are angry at me. I want to be only angry at you." She set the kit on the table between them. "That would be simpler." He said nothing. "You should have looked harder," she said. "I know you're going to tell me why you couldn't, and most of it is probably even true, but you should have looked harder. I needed you to look." "I know. I was 22, and I was terrified, and I had nothing, and I built everything from nothing because I had to." She looked at him. "And Noah is incredible. He is the best thing I have ever done, and I would not change him. But I'm allowed to be angry that I did it without you when it didn't have to be that way." "Yes," he said, "you are." She sat with that for a moment. "What happens now?" she said. "The organization. What happens to all of it?" He leaned back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling the way people look when they are finding words they haven't used before. "It gets complicated," he said. "Vincent's people don't dissolve just because Vincent's gone. There are conversations to have, alliances to restructure, people to be reassured or managed or removed." He brought his eyes back down. "That takes time." "How much time?" "Months, maybe a year." He paused. "But the threat, the specific threat to you and Noah, that's finished. That was Vincent's operation, his personal leverage play. Without him, it has no author. Can you promise me that?" He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. She studied his face and looked for the places where a man lies with his eyes and found nothing in the usual positions. "The legitimate businesses," she said. "The outline you gave me once, a long time ago. The things you said you wanted to build toward." He looked slightly surprised, which was the first unguarded thing she'd seen from him in hours. "You remember that? Remember everything you told me." She said it without softness, just fact. "I had 6 years to go over it." His jaw moved. "The import business is real. The property holdings are legitimate. There are things to divest, things that have to go to someone else.
I've been building toward clean for 2 years. Because of Vincent? Because of... He looked at the table. Because of what I wanted it to look like. If I ever found you. If there was any version of this that could work. He stopped. It sounds like calculation. It wasn't calculation. What was it? It was wanting something to offer. He said it quietly, the way you say things that have been held in too long. Something that wasn't just damage and danger, and asking you to absorb the cost of choices I made. She sat with this. The kitchen was very quiet. The radiator ticked. The window over the sink showed a sky that was starting to consider its options, the absolute black of 3 in the morning beginning to soften almost imperceptibly toward something. I'm not moving into your life, she said. Not like that. Not all at once. Noah doesn't know who you are, and that has to be handled carefully and slowly and on his schedule, not yours and not mine. Okay. And I'm not quitting my job. Something close to a smile crossed his face, so briefly she almost missed it. Okay. I'm serious. I know. He looked at her. I know you are. She pushed the first aid kit toward him and stood up. There are probably 4 or 5 more things I need to say to you that I don't have the energy for tonight, she said. We'll get to them. We'll get to them, he agreed. She went upstairs. She stood in Noah's doorway for a long time. He was back in the narrow bed, the dinosaur backpack on the floor beside him, one arm thrown out the way he always slept. His face was completely relaxed, all the strain of the night metabolized somewhere in the unconscious efficiency of childhood, and he looked like exactly what he was. A 6-year-old who had been scared and had held himself together and had trusted the adults around him to fix it, and had been right to trust them, which was the thing she would spend time being grateful for when she had room for gratitude. She went to her own room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She thought about the apartment in Manhattan, the progress charts on the fridge, the half-framed photograph she'd been carrying in her apron pocket for 2 days. She thought about what rebuilding looked like for the 3rd time. The first from 22 to 28, the second from tonight forward, the shape of it still too new to be a shape. She lay down. She slept. In the morning, Noah woke her by opening her bedroom door and standing in the doorway with the seriousness of someone delivering a report. Mrs. Carver made eggs, he said. She put cheese in them. That's the best kind, Ava said. That's what I said. He came in and climbed onto the bed beside her with the unselfconscious physicality of a child who had not yet learned to ask permission for proximity. He lay down next to her on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling. Mama. Yeah. Is that man staying? She looked at the ceiling too. A water stain in the corner, old, shaped vaguely like something she couldn't identify. For a while, she said. Maybe. Noah considered this with his characteristic gravity. He kept his promise, he said. The fire drill thing. He did. That's good. Noah appeared to close the matter. He turned his head toward her. Can we see the squirrels today? Yeah, she said. I think we can do that. He got up with the sudden kinetic energy of a child who has decided the conversation is complete and launched himself off the bed and disappeared through the door, and she heard his feet on the stairs and then his voice somewhere below asking Mrs. Carver something about squirrel behavior and Mrs. Carver's measured response. She lay still for another moment. Then she got up. Downstairs, Damien was at the kitchen table with coffee and his phone, working through something on the screen with the focused efficiency she remembered from another time. He looked up when she came in. His face did the thing it had been doing since the restaurant. That particular quality of attention, like she was something he was still adjusting to seeing. Coffee, she said. He pushed the pot toward her. She poured a cup and stood at the counter and looked out the window at the backyard. White, still, the tree line dark beyond the snow. Ordinary in the morning light in a way it hadn't been possible to see last night. I need to call the restaurant, she said. Tell them I won't be in for a few days. Okay. Gerald's going to be annoyed. Probably. She drank her coffee. Outside, a squirrel moved across the snow at the edge of the yard, stopped, moved again. Noah wants to see the squirrels, she said. Damien turned from his phone. He looked at the window, at the squirrel, at the yard that had been a crime scene 12 hours ago and was now just a yard in winter. I'll take him, he said. She looked at him. He met her eyes and held them, not pressing, just present.
Just there, the way he had not been for 6 years, and was now, in this kitchen, on this morning, with coffee going cold in her cup and their son's voice coming down from somewhere above them, asking Mrs. Carver a follow-up question about the dietary preferences of squirrels. He's going to ask you things, she said, questions you won't know how to answer. I know. He doesn't stop. He goes until he's satisfied. I'll manage. He's going to want to know where you've been. Damien was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll tell him I was away, that I came back. That's not enough for him. I know. His jaw moved. I'll tell him the truth. Pieces of it. The pieces that are for him. He looked at her. And we decide together which pieces those are. She looked at him for a long moment across the kitchen. This man she had loved at 22 and hated at 23 and grieved at 24, and slowly, out of sheer necessity, stopped caring at 25, and then carried differently at 26 and 27, not as a wound, but as a fact, the way you carry things that have shaped you without resolving. He was not the same person. Neither was she. What they were now was uncharted, and uncharted had always terrified her more than anything. She had spent 6 years building maps, building structure, building the known so thoroughly that the unknown couldn't get purchase. She was going to have to learn to tolerate the uncharted. Not today. Today was squirrels and cheese eggs and Gerald's annoyance over the phone and Noah's questions and the slow, ordinary business of getting through a morning after a night like the one they'd had. Today was small and manageable and broken into pieces she could handle one at a time. Go take him to see the squirrels, she said. Damien stood. He moved toward the door that led to the backyard, and then he stopped. Ava. She looked at him. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at her, across the kitchen, with the morning light coming through the window behind her, and the coffee going cold in her hand, and the sound of Noah on the stairs now, coming down, his feet uneven and enthusiastic on each step. I know it doesn't undo anything, he said. What I'm going to do from here, it doesn't undo what it cost you. No, she said. It doesn't. I know that. She nodded once. Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway. He saw Damien and stopped, assessing in the way he assessed new variables in his environment. Are you coming to see the squirrels? He said. Damien looked at him. The open, unguarded thing crossed his face again, and this time Ava didn't look away from it, let herself see it for what it was. A man meeting his son in the cold morning light of an ordinary kitchen, without ceremony, without the language to frame it, just the fact of it. Yeah, Damien said. I am. Noah considered this and found it satisfactory. He turned toward the back door with the total forward momentum of someone who has made a decision. You have to be quiet, he said, with great authority, or they run. Got it, Damien said. He caught Ava's eyes once more over Noah's head. She looked at him steadily. This man who was damage and history and a scar on his jaw and split knuckles, and the father of her son and someone she did not yet know how to trust and was going to have to figure out anyway. She tipped her chin toward the door. Go. He went. She stood at the kitchen window and watched them cross the snow-covered yard. Noah in his coat and his Velcro boots, moving fast, pointing at the tree line. Damien behind him, hands at his sides, doing what she had watched him do all night in every room they'd moved through together, which was orient himself entirely toward the thing that needed protecting. A squirrel appeared at the base of the nearest tree. Noah crouched down immediately, went perfectly still, turned to look back at Damien with enormous eyes and one finger pressed to his lips. Damien crouched beside him. They stayed like that, both of them still, both of them watching the animal go about its small and indifferent business in the snow. And Ava stood at the window with her coffee in both hands and the warmth of it moving up through her palms, and she watched them, and the morning light was thin and pale and winter clean across the yard, and the city was 40 minutes south and full of everything that still needed to be handled. And none of it was finished, none of it was clean. But this moment in this yard on this morning was a thing she could hold in her hands without it breaking. She drank her coffee. Outside, Noah said something to Damien in the hushed, urgent whisper of a child conveying critical intelligence, and Damien listened with his full attention, the way he had listened to everything her son had said since the moment they met, and nodded once, gravely, in the manner of someone receiving information of genuine importance. The squirrel moved to a different patch of snow. Noah pointed, barely breathing. Ava turned from the window. She poured more coffee. She found her phone and dialed the restaurant and listened to it ring and thought about the progress charts on her fridge. Still there, pinned with the same magnet she'd bought at the dollar store 2 years ago. She thought about how she would go back for them, how she would take them down carefully and bring them here, or to wherever came next, and put them back up somewhere Noah could see them, because he checked them every morning, and he needed to see how far he'd come. Gerald answered on the 4th ring, already irritated. She took a breath. "It's Ava," she said. "I'm not going to be in for a few days." I know, Gerald. I'll explain when I'm back." She paused. "I'm fine. Everything's fine." Outside, through the window, her son was showing a man he'd known for less than 12 hours how to be still enough that the world came to you. She turned her back on the window and finished the conversation, and planned the next thing, and then the thing after that, the way she had always done. Forward, piece by piece, one day at a time, in the direction of whatever she was building now. It was not a perfect morning, but it was hers.